Good evening, I'm Rourke Sanderson. My interviewee is Steven Sanderson for History 142. Tonight I will be asking him 40 questions about my person, Betty Sanderson, and we will should begin very shortly. So, Steve, question number 1. What political party did Mrs. Sanderson belong to?
My mother belonged to the Democratic Party. She was a lifelong Democrat. Uh, she grew up during the Depression, born in 1940, and as a result, she believed in Roosevelt politics.
And would she have considered herself active in the day in politics? Maybe activism, picketing, helping campaigns.
No, she was never active in campaigning of any kind. Uh, I believe she did volunteer at the polls once in a while, but it was never for picketing or anything like that. And during the Vietnam War, she never got into the protests of the day as well, and the political protests of the day. She was already raising a family by then, so.
You said that she was a Democrat, so how did she react to the 1968 and 1972 elections?
1968, I was only a couple years old. I don't remember that one very well, but I remember 1972 very well. My father and she started discussing who they voted for, and my dad voted for Nixon, and my mom voted for McGovern, I believe, or yeah, McGovern, and they went on and on about how they canceled each other's vote and how could each other be so stupid.
So, she was raising a family in the late 60s, early 70s.
That's right. My oldest brother was born in 1961, and my youngest was in 1968. So there were four of us in that 7 year span.
So, how was life like during the oil embargo of the 70s?
In the 70s, gas was really cheap up until about 1973, 1974, when gas, you could still get it 25, 26 cents a gallon. I remember my dad complaining about the price of gas is going up to 28 cents a gallon. What are they going to do to us? Um, but it really came to a head in the oil embargo that the Arabs did in 1974, I believe, when the gas really shot up. I mean, it shot up to 30 and 40 cents a gallon. And my dad was a teacher, my mom was a homemaker, and so there wasn't a whole lot of money left over. And it's like gas today going from $2 it is now up to $3.50. You have to make hard choices about what you're going to go and buy and what you're not going to go and buy.
And also, you said earlier you mentioned Vietnam. What was her reaction to the whole war? Did she think it was justified to go into Vietnam?
Uh, she was when the Vietnam War was going on, I was still young. I mean, it ended in '75. I was a little more than 10 when it ended. Back then, they ended every evening newscast with the list of war casualties that would go up. You'd see the scroll of the people who had died in combat that day or in that week, and it was always a terrible thing for my mom to see. She didn't want to stay and see who all had been killed. Uh, I know there was a boy who was killed in Vietnam who was from our town. He was a fighter pilot who was shot down over Vietnam. And my mom would always say, war is such a terrible thing. And so she never really got into who was right, who was wrong, but she recognized the cost of war itself as being very high.
Powerful. We're going to move on to education now. Grandma attended Slippery Rock University in Grove City. So was she focused on her education, or was she more hang out party type in the 60s, 50s, 60s?
My parents would tell stories of Slimy Pebble University, which was Slippery Rock, is what their uh, name for it was. Now back then, coeducational didn't mean like it means today, where uh, boys and girls live on the same floor. Back then, they had whole dormitories that were all female and whole dormitories that were all male. And as a result, you couldn't get in and out of those dorms because you had to pass through the RA of the day. And if you were a male, you couldn't go to the female um, dorm. If you did go, you had to be checked in. You had to be accompanied the entire time. You had to have all kinds of manner of things. Now they don't do that in college anymore. Um, Party life, it's different than it is today, is what they said. Now, you have to understand, parents never want their kids to see the bad that they did. So they won't tell you very many stories of them partying and having fun. But, they Slippery Rock was about 2 hours from my parents' home. They both grew up in the Johnstown area of Pennsylvania. And so they met uh, because my dad actually had a car after he left the Air Force. He actually had enough money to buy a car. And so he became the carpool. And they would go and take trips back home, and he'd have a whole bunch of people going with him. Um, but as far as partying, it's not the raucous partying they had today. Beer parties, and I'm sure there was alcohol, but it was not the same. It was much more muted, and anything was much more hushed.
So when she was at college, she was going for a degree in education. Did she use it to teach, or did she not use the degree?
When she was in college, um, she graduated high school in 1958 from the Johnstown Catholic High School. And when she graduated, she went right to college at 18. And she met my dad there, and she became pregnant with my uh, oldest brother in 1961. They were married in January of 61, and my brother was born in November of 61. She would have been a junior at this time, and she stayed in school. My grandparents actually helped watch my oldest brother, um, and then she graduated in 1962. She did the student teaching, but she never uh, um, became a teacher or taught in the school system, because in '62 she became pregnant again with my other brother. Uh, so while she had the degree, she never used it, and that was very common for girls back then. They would go to school, and they would meet their husbands, and then they'd start a family.
That makes my next question kind of redundant, but her highest degree was a bachelor's.
Yeah, her highest degree was a Bachelor of Education.
Okay. Uh, could she have possibly been in a sorority at college, or was she not that type? Did she like to keep to herself?
When she was in college, she never mentioned that she was in any kind of sorority. She mentioned a roommate that she had, but um, they were not sorority sisters as far as I know.
So she had a roommate. Did she ever talk about a roommate too as a family?
She mentioned her roommate to me not long before she died. Um, she said that her roommate was a Mormon, which is uncommon in the East Coast. Mormons are mostly out towards Utah and Nevada, uh, not really prevalent in Western Pennsylvania. So, especially for a Catholic girl, like she was.
She was quiet on her own college. She didn't really mention it to you, but did she influence yours in any way?
When I was in high school, education was always very important. My parents were both teachers, so they valued the education. But my dad was just a fifth grade teacher, and his sole income. And so it was very difficult to say, yeah, we will pay for college or anything like that. So when I was 17, I joined the Army like my oldest brother had done before me. That way I could go to college on my own and not have to worry about my parents spending money for me. Um, Now, obviously, that being said, when I did go back to school, I was already 20, almost 26. And so when I did go back to school, you know, she really didn't have much say in what I was doing. I was already a man by then.
So that pretty much wraps up the education field. Any other remarks you'd like to make on her education or how she helped you?
Well, my mother was a very uh, big time reader. She would go and read a lot of books out loud to the kids. That was one of the things that she had done. Is she was a big Civil War buff, and she had uh, a lot of Civil War books by an author named Bruce Catton, and he was around in the 40s and 50s. And she used to read these books out loud, and it gave all the kids, all my brothers and myself, a sense of history, what was going on. She loved to read um, history of any kind, really. She used to get these magazines in the mail about the First World War, and then you'd relive the battles through the magazine pages. Uh, Submarines. They had a magazine about submarines back then in the 70s, believe it or not. And she worked for a time at a submarine sandwich place called Rudy's. And my older brother was a little bit of an artist. And so she had him go and make submarine drawings that she took to decorate the submarine sandwich shop.
And which brother was the artist?
That was David. He was actually quite good.
Interesting. So now we move from education to lifestyle, and as I may have seen in my earlier life, Grandma liked to smoke. She would always maybe have a cigarette once in a while, or was she a big time smoker?
It wasn't once in a while. She smoked like a chimney. She was more than a pack a day. I used to criticize her a lot because, the smoking was a nasty habit even when I was a kid. Um, I can remember one time when I was a boy growing up. I was less than 10 or so. Um, I had stolen one of her cigarettes out of the case, and I was out on the back porch, and I was trying to light it up, and I couldn't get it lit. And she made me smoke the whole damn thing. She caught me outside and made me smoke the whole thing. I got so sick. But she was a smoker. Both my parents were smokers. She started in high school, of all places. Uh, Back then, in the 50s, smoking was a very common theme. Uh, you know, and even in today's society, smoking is seen as a grown-up activity, kind of disgusting grown-up activity, but it's still people perceive themselves as being older, more mature, and that's how it was looked upon in the 1940s and 50s. If you look back at the old movies, everybody smoked. You would be hard pressed to find somebody who didn't smoke. Um, and so now in today's society, where less than 1 in 4 people smokes. But she and my dad both smoked, uh, and it was a common thing. She smoked Winston, the Winston brand, Winston Salem, no Salem's, and my dad smoked Winston's. That's how it was. And then she got onto Pall Mall after a while, and we actually tried to turn. They used to make these little novelty gifts, basically. And it was you put the tobacco in there, and then you have the roll papers, and then you have the cigarette filters, and then you go from station to station making your own cigarettes. And it sounds kind of boring, but for kids, for my brothers and I, we thought this was the greatest toy in the world because you could go and make cigarettes and you'd screw them up, and they'd look like a pile of poo. But and then my parents would get mad. Where's all our smoking stuff going? Well, it's in the trash because we're making stuff as kids.
It's a science experiment, pretty much.
It was a big time science experiment.
So, did she have was she a neat freak? Did she like to keep things clean, or was she a bit slovenly? Didn't really care how the house looked.
She was a stay-at-home mom, so she had the time to go and keep things up. She liked to have dishes out of the sink, and so once the kids got old enough, she made them all wash dishes. We all had chores, take out the trash, do the laundry, these kind of things. We became the little minions of the day, um, and so that was valuable for us. But we were always required to keep our rooms clean, and then the rest of the house was presentable. Uh, but back then, we didn't have as much stuff as we have today. I mean, you look around this house and there's a lot of stuff. Back then, you didn't have a whole lot. You only had 3 sets of clothes to go to school in. You had socks and that kind of stuff. But we didn't have piles of clothes. We didn't have piles of toys. There was no computer. We had to entertain ourselves. Go stay in the yard, right? That was play outside. Uh, so we did that. And no air conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
And so you didn't want to stay in the house because it was too dang hot. So you go outside, and it was easier to keep the house clean. Now, today, we don't want kids to go outside because we don't know who's going to steal them, right? And then it's cooler inside because we all have air conditioning. And so it's tougher to keep things clean when you got people underfoot all the time.
Did she have any weird habits she would ever do? Like, she say grace before a meal, or smoke a cigarette before bedtime, or something?
Well, I don't know what she did before bed, but she had this really weird speech habit where it used to get on my nerves.
Really? How so?
Well, phantom. Phantom. She always said phantom. And I was just like, what are you doing? It's phantom. It's a ghost. Why don't you just say ghost instead of phantom? And she would say, mind your own darn business. Who are you to correct me? So that was the weirdest thing that I can remember.
Phantom, not phantom.
Phantom, not phantom.
Amazing. Was she intrusive on your life? Did she rule with an iron fist in the house, or was she carefree about your choices that you made?
Oh no, there was no carefree about it. Um, privacy was non-existent. Okay, with 3 other brothers and parents, privacy was non-existent. You kept your room doors open. They could see what you were doing unless you were in trouble. Then the room door became closed, but you couldn't do anything in there, right? They wanted to know who your friends were, where you were going, what you were going to be doing, curfew if you were going to be out, especially when I got a little bit older. And it wasn't one of these lackadaisical things. Oh, you go have fun with your friends. No, they wanted to know exactly where it was. When I was old enough to drive back then, Pennsylvania was 16 to get your learner's permit, and you could get your license right away. But my parents both said, no, you'll wait until you're 17 before you get your license. And that's a good rule. I don't think many 15-year-olds are quite ready to be responsible enough to handle the car. That's just my opinion. But intrusive, yeah, my parents were very, they ruled with an iron fist. If you did something wrong, they knew about it, and they had like eyes in the back of their head. She was the disciplinarian. You never wanted to get my dad mad at you. Because if my dad got mad at you, he'd line all 4 kids up in the kitchen, and he'd start yelling inches from your face, and he'd never hit you, but he'd put the fear of God into you. And so let mom go and take the punishment, because that's better than having my dad come up and scare the hell out of you. But my mom, she was the one who spanked and did the paddling, and then she'd rule. Yeah, wait till I tell your dad what you did when you were gone, when he was gone. It's kind of like that Bill Engvall. You know what happened in this house while you were at your job? So it was kind of funny.
In the 1960s, women were stay at home, or were they discovering more independence and going out and holding jobs?
Uh, After the Second World War, uh, when the servicemen started coming home, they started losing a lot of their jobs to the returning GIs, and it reverted back to it was during the Depression, where you had the man do the work and the woman keep up the house. It was very sexist in its way that it was done. That's just the way it was. That was society on a whole. You didn't have the divorce rate that you had now. You didn't have the kind of liberation you had now, or you didn't really have the same kind of choice that you have now. Now, women have all kinds of choices that they have. If they want to raise a family, they can raise a family. If they want to have a career, they can have a career. So a lot of those ceilings have been taken away. Uh, but back in the 60s, it was expected that you got an education, you got married, you had kids, you took care of your husband. That's just the way it was. And it was during the late 70s, I guess, where the NOW organization, National Organization of Women, had really taken off. And you saw a lot more choice going on. And you started having the people burning their bras out there. Um, and just voicing their displeasure in the status quo. They thought there was more to it than that. And then there is. I mean, we see today's society where the men and women can both equally do the same job. There are some uh, still ceilings in place. Right now, you hear a lot of discrepancy in wage discrimination in females. Um, so that happens still, but they have much more choice than they used to in the 60s.
Here's a funny question I thought of. In the 1970s, dressing was a big part of culture, and so did your mom ever own a pair of bell-bottom jeans?
My mom didn't, but the boys did. We all wore bell-bottom jeans at one time. In fact, my dad, he had a pair of bell-bottom jeans. Uh, my mom, after 4 kids, she became a little bit heavy. Well, she became a bit heavy. And so she used to wear things that were easy to put on and off. So jeans were never really her forte. But I've got pictures somewhere of my dad in his sideburns, his paisley shirt, and that was the fad of the day was that. I won't say psychedelic drug culture because it wasn't. It was just the 60s and 70s of the day where they had the wild style of clothing. Paisleys were in, uh, you know, leisure suits with the wide collars. In the 70s, when my grandfathers died, uh, parents went out there and they bought us these huge collared leisure suits, and they were all polyester. You thought you were uh, staying alive with John Travolta, right? It was kind of embarrassing, really. Thank goodness I don't have any of those pictures around.
That would be scary to see, even you. And she lived in a Pittsburgh suburb, and we all know Pittsburgh today has some bad neighborhoods. Did she ever fear any parts of those during her raising a family?
Well, Pittsburgh, like any other metropolitan area, has its bad areas, and with time, they change. They migrate. Uh, Back then, East Liberty was always the bad part of town. It was the rundown part. It was the one with the most socioeconomically depressed class of people. So you didn't want to go down to East Liberty. And as I was growing up, she'd always say, you don't want to go towards the Homewood area. You don't want to go to these other areas that were considered bad and rough neighborhoods. Even in the development we lived in, there was a rough part up towards the back end of that development that was, yeah, it was not the safest thing to go to. So it happens in every town.
So now that was the end of the lifestyle part. So work, and we mentioned work before. How many jobs did she hold in the span from when she worked? Did she work? I don't know if she worked in high school like many kids do today. She may work to pay her for college, or did she work after that?
Hmm. Okay, her parents put her through college, but she did have a job in college, but I can't remember for the life of me what it was.
Well, being an only child is nice.
Yeah, she was an only child growing up, um, and growing up back then as an only child uh, in the 40s and 50s, uh, things didn't cost as much, and so unlike today's college education, which costs an arm and a leg and is a generational cost problem. Back then, it was more affordable. And so her parents actually put her through college. She had a job in college, and then she didn't have to work again until the uh, the early 70s. By then, raising four boys, uh, it's a challenge. Raising kids and having a job is very challenging, and I can attest to that being a single dad, because you just have to have everything lined up, have to have everything in order all the time. You can't run with chaos. It has to be organized. And so she was a stay-at-home mom, raising four boys. And in the early 70s, when my youngest brother was old enough to go to school, then she would start working in the afternoon. Uh, and then she'd become, well, the kids would become latchkey kids, is what we were. We wore this little key around our neck, and depending on where you came, what time you got home, you had to have the dinners started before my dad got home after school, because she may have been working late. And then on special days, when this is when she was working at the submarine shop, on special days when my dad had money, then you would go over to the submarine shop and you'd get a submarine, no soda, you get water, uh, and that would be the special thing, because then your mom would make your sandwich. That was cool. So you know,
So was that a far walk to go to the submarine shop from her
oh,
school?
we had to drive. The community I lived in was uh, a bedroom community, is what they would consider it. There weren't very many eating places, so mostly residential areas. So you had to drive, 15 minutes away to go to any McDonald's. Uh, they had McDonald's back then, believe it or not. Um, yeah, back then it was millions, sir, not billions. Um, and so we had to drive out to the Miracle Mile, which is out in Monroeville, where the Subway shop is, and it's still there today. Um, it's right beside the Ralph's Army Navy surplus, right there on the Miracle Mile, and where we had eaten Taco Bell with my brother's boys. It's about a half a mile from that. But it still looks the same as it did back in the 70s. The inside looks the same. I don't know if they have the pictures up anymore. It's been years since I've been inside.
As I mentioned earlier before, she had a degree in education. Some of the jobs she held weren't education related, but did her education degree help her in any way?
Uh, when I was in high school, she took a job at the public library, the Penn Hills branch of the public library, and there her education degree came in handy, because the Dewey Decimal System and all these other places. Back then, everything was still the punch card and the dates on the punch card. Nothing was electronic. Uh, Barcoding was unheard of, and so everything was very manual oriented. Uh, and actually, a lot of education people volunteered at the library. Now, she was getting paid at the library. So it came in handy there. And she worked there for a number of years, from when I was in high school, so say ninth grade, all the way to probably about 10 years before she died. So
she loved trivia. So was the public library a job for her that she really cherished?
she liked it. She knew a lot of people up there. Um, it is funny how you gravitate towards the same kind of people. Um, and so the people at the library had the same likes, dislikes, and so it became very close-knit group of people at the library, and she really enjoyed it. It's not very demanding work, but it is where you can go out, you can earn, back then minimum wage was like $3 or something like that. And so she could get out of the house and go with and be with people that you could get along with well and have a fun time doing, even if you had to be quiet in the library. So, but you know, she'd take you up to the library if she was working, especially during the summer when you didn't have school, and then you'd go into the library and you'd read books, and because computers were unheard of, you know.
And you only had 3 TV stations to deal with most of the time.
Yeah, you know, the TV had to get up and change the channel. Uh, and then you had to go out there and turn the rabbit ears a certain way, turn the antenna, and my dad would be yelling inside, "No, to the left! No, the other left!" And so, just to get a station in.
So, at the library or other jobs, was she paid as much as her other coworkers, or were there still the wage discrepancy you talked about earlier?
Most of the employees at the library were female. And so I doubt if it would be much discrimination amongst themselves as far as wage discrimination. It's a minimum wage job. I mean, that's the way it is. It would be the bare minimum, maybe a little bit more, but everyone's getting paid about the same. It would probably depend on how long you were there and what step increases you got over time. You know, back then a dime an hour would be good money. Yeah, things cost a lot less back then.
So there's not the big wage gap we understand today.
You know, you look at the wage discrimination now, where you know, $7.50, $7.75, $8. You know, that's barely cutting it. You know, it's barely making ends meet. And then you got people who are clamoring for $15 in a fast food job. You know, that was unheard of back then. $15 hour job, you were working. You know, you were making some serious cash. But now, you know, $3 an hour wouldn't buy you a meal at Burger King. So
now, so now that we moved to the around the home type of questions, who did most of the work outside? Was it you and your brothers, or did she help rake leaves, or?
My mother didn't do anything outside. The inside was hers, the outside was my dad's. And so once my dad, you know, once the kids got old enough, my dad expected that the boys did all the yard work. And so we used to fight over who was going to go and rake, who was going to go and mow, who was going to go and weed eat. And my mother, she was in charge of it, but she wouldn't do any work. She'd sit on the porch and she'd say, "You missed a spot." You know, my dad actually worked a second job at night. He was a teacher during the day, and then he'd paint at night. He was a paint contractor at night. And so he wouldn't get back until about 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And then she would go and have everything done. But the boys would do all the work. She'd be like the overseer of the gang. And she'd say, "Go out there and do that. You boys stop fighting. You do this and you do that." And that's what she did. She was the boss.
So as you said, she did most of the inside work. Did she have a certain job that she let you guys do?
Most of the inside work, the biggest thing she did really was cook. And of course, you got 4 kids, 4 minions. So
You get hungry.
Well, that and the fact that, you know, while I'm cooking, you guys clean. You go and take the trash out. You do the dishes. So she was a wonderful cook, a great cook. But, you know, once you get kids old enough to do the jobs, they start tasking them out to do it.
Since you were latchkey kids, which you said earlier, did you cook any meals when you were there, or just maybe just make yourself? Today's frozen dinners that we eat are unheard of, I would guess, and so you had to cook meals for yourself. Any small? Did you have snacks there at the house? You got hungry after school, or did you have to cook full-blown meals to help your parents out?
Well, microwaves were not invented back then, and so you didn't go to the freezer, pop you out a Michaelinas, and then slap it in there and eat it. And so if you were hungry, you ate peanut butter and jelly crackers or something, but you weren't going to eat a full-blown meal before dinner. That was the way it was. My mom said, many times, you're not going to spoil dinner. I'm taking the time and effort to go and make dinner. You're going to eat it. And even if you don't like it, you'll say you liked it because a lot of time and effort goes into it. And back then it was meals by scratch. You didn't go and pull out a box of hamburger helper and slap it in there, and then 15 minutes later out it comes. These took time. It took some planning. Everything was out of a can or out of a box, and you had to go and actually put it all together. Nothing was fast like it is now, where times have changed, really, because now many families that I know, they're getting home from school, getting home from work, getting the kids, and they're moving out to soccer, to football practice, to some other after school activity, where time is very critical now. And so you can go ahead now and feed a meal out of a microwave on the go, but back then you couldn't do it. And so you didn't go and snack. If you wanted anything, you had to get a leftover out of the refrigerator, and that was usually my dad's lunch for the next day, so you don't touch that either. So you had crackers, you had peanut butter and jelly. You wanted to eat an apple, you could eat an apple or celery, which was not my favorite. But you could have a lot, they had raisins and stuff, nuts. But you weren't going to eat a full-blown meal before dinner.
As you said, she was a disciplinarian, and your dad would often yell at you. So, what were some of the punishments if rules were broken?
Well, when you're younger, corporal punishment was given. That saying, spare the rod, spoil the child. And you can take that too far, but my parents never took that far. When we were younger, like less than 6, 7, you did something wrong, they'd go and smack your butt. Weren't afraid to hit you in the butt. They didn't hit you in the face, they didn't hit you in the arm, they hit you in the butt with padding. And then one time, we didn't have sneakers like we have sneakers now. So if you wore something, you wore almost like church shoes. That's what you wore. We didn't have a ton of shoes in the closet, ton of clothes. And so one time she was going to go and spank me. She had me up against the wall, and I raised my foot at the last minute. She caught the heel of my shoe with her hand. Thought she broke her hand. So from that point on, she started using the wooden spoon. It wouldn't get hurt like that. So yeah, she was a disciplinarian, but she wouldn't be unfair about it. She wouldn't knock you about it if you just for being noisy or anything. She might yell at you a little bit, but she wouldn't beat you for no reason. You had to do something bad, and then she was always she'd tell you first, and then if you kept it on, she'd tell you some more, and then each time it would get more severe until she finally just had it and said, "Okay, you're not listening."
And your brothers would attest that you were never beaten as a kid. You were her favorite child, and you disagree with that. Is that correct?
Yeah, they don't know what they're talking about. And my oldest brothers, they had the benefit of being born first, so they got the brunt of all the punishment. Because they were older, they should have known better. I was the third of 4 children. I was a smart and good-looking one. My brothers, they would, they were older, so they could do more things. Um, and so if I wanted to get out of something, I can't do that. I'd play innocent. Uh, and then if anything went wrong, well, guess who caught the punishment? Is because they were older. They should have known better. What do you mean you let him play with a pair of scissors? Don't you know better than that? Pow, pow, pow. But in reality, uh, my parents went out one evening, or actually one afternoon, and my brother who's dead now, that was Richard. He and I were playing balloon football in the hallway, and we didn't have carpeted floor back then. Uh, we had hardwood floor, and the hallway was about 36 inches wide. It's about 15 feet long, pretty small, cramped area. The house itself wasn't very big. And so we blow up balloons, and that would be our football, because we always thought we were going to be the Franco Harrises of the day or the Rocky Blairs of the day. We were going to go out and score touchdowns all day long. This is how we could play football without actually going outside, because when they were away, we didn't go outside. There were rules. Um, and so uh, I can't remember how it worked. It was some sort of grab and hold, and then you were down. You were considered down. Well, my brother, being the hard-headed one that he was, he didn't think he was down anymore. So I took both of his feet out from under him, and then when his head came down, he took a bite out of the floor, and he lost a tooth. Actually shattered the tooth, and part of it left up in there. And when my parents came home, there was hell to pay. Uh, my dad had to take my brother to the dentist, the emergency dental thing, and my mother came in and gave me a good beating. I'll tell you that. My brothers don't remember that. They don't remember anything to this day. Um, but I got beat. I remember several times where I got beat, um, and my brothers used to take delight in saying I was a spoiled child. And I wasn't. I was the same as they were, just a little bit younger. Um, uh, so yeah, I got punished just like everyone else did.
So your parents were pretty strict. Were there any like really, really, really strict rules that you had that maybe influenced your parenting today?
Well, you're a product of your upbringing in many ways, and so I believe in corporal punishment because my parents believed in it. As long as you don't beat it to an inch of their life, right? And you got to do it for a reason. I'm not one of these kind of guys that say don't beat your kid at the grocery store. Well, don't discipline your child at the grocery store. And let me rephrase it. Don't want to beat them, but you can go and grab their attention with a smack to the backside. Uh, I think a lot of times we've, as a society, we're a little bit too permissive sometimes. Uh, I was raised in a different time. Uh, I'm one of the last of the baby boomers, first of the Generation Xer, or whatever they are called now. Born in 64, 65, 66, Generation X. Um, part of the last of the baby boomers and part of the Generation X now, where things started changing. And so, my dad expected a lot of things. He wanted you to do it right. If you didn't do it right, it wasn't, oh, it's okay. Try it again until you get it right. There was none of this coddling anybody. Oh, here's a trophy just for participating. There was none of that. If you wanted to be a baseball player, you had to be good at Little League, right? Most of the time, you just went out to Little League to have fun. You weren't out there to be the next, Alvarez or anybody like that. You just wanted to go on and have fun and play ball. But yeah, they were hard because they wanted to raise you right. I understand the value of what they tried to do, I weren't saying I'm not saying they're perfect in every way. Um, I remember a lot of things that they did in the early '70s that they probably weren't. They drank, they smoked, they had parties, they had friends, they had family, they had a lot of things, but they were trying to teach you the value of what it was. And so they didn't want you to grow up like a bunch of free-range chickens, with no order, no discipline. Because if you don't have discipline and order in your life, really, what do you have? If you can't even control yourself, how are you going to do anything? Um, eh, um, but in today's society, is a little bit different.
Hmm. So that would end the around the house section. We're gonna move on to music now. Now she was talented at the piano. Did she play in church or did she play around the house?
My mother was a Catholic growing up. We went to Catholic school, and back then the Second Vatican Council uh, in the '60s had decreed that birth control was, bad, and they still argue that birth control is bad. Uh, and so, a story at the confessional, my parents told me years later, was that they both went in there and they said, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I'm using birth control." Well, both of them said the same thing to the same priest, right, at different times. And my dad got a very late penance. He had to say a couple of Hail Marys, but my mother was taken to task for how could you ever use birth control? Don't you know it's a mortal sin to use birth control? By this time, she had already had 4 kids. And so she's shaken by this whole ordeal. And so they get back out to the car and they're driving home, and my dad says, "What are you so upset about?" My mother says, "I can't really talk about it, confessed my sins, and the priest let me have a what for?" And then my dad asked her, "Well, I confessed my sin of using birth control. I wasn't anything." She said, "That was what I confessed, and he gave me a much greater punishment than yours." And to that day, from that day forward, church became less and less important to them. In fact, they only went at Christmas or at Easter or at funerals. Uh, and so you knew about the church. My grandparents, take you to church, so you had to know all the rules of church. Uh, but my parents, really stopped going at that point. As far as the piano, she had taken piano lessons when she was a kid. And when I was a boy, it was probably in the late '60s, early '70s, they had, my dad had bought her an upright piano, kind of like what we got downstairs, an old upright piano. And so she used to play it at Christmas time. She could read music, and she was able to go and teach people how to play music and sing songs. And she had a good voice; she could sing fairly well. Uh, and then, probably about '77 or '78, my dad had got her an electric organ for Christmas. It was one of these ones that played all these different instrument sounds on there, and it came with this book. And then she would play it, and then she encouraged all the boys to get on there and read some music. So we had some god awful sounds going on that thing. Because you could play a trumpet or a clarinet or chimes or something like that. And so she always encouraged you to play music. And by this time, my brother was playing the cornet. My second brother didn't play any instruments, but I was playing a clarinet at the time. And so, you could practice on the piano, on the organ, and then play music from the organ with the clarinet. So it was a lot of fun at the time.
Improv, family musician.
Yeah, but my brother, he didn't play the cornet when I was playing. He was 4 years older than I was.
So she hated the song Silent Night, her least favorite Christmas carol of all time. Do you want to explain why that was?
Well, growing up Catholic, they sang Christmas songs in Latin. This was back when the Mass was done in Latin, and no one knew what anyone was saying. They just knew it was in Latin. And so, Adeste Fidelis, Silent Night, O Come All Ye Faithful, all these songs were done in Latin. And as a result, uh, the the same songs would be over and over and over again. And plus, they didn't have a ton of songs back then. I mean, it wasn't that bad, but you know, everyone wants to hear the same song over again. And she just despised it because she had sang it so many times in Latin that as soon as the song would come on at Christmas time, she'd change the channel or she'd walk out of the room. If they did it in church, she'd get up and leave. Everybody does Silent Night at church, right? So that was the cue to go to the car. Beat the rush hour.
Grandma had a record player in her living room. Did she use it to play records at the time that were popular during the time?
Records were always something big. She had records. My dad had records. Back then they had 3 different speeds on the record player. It was 78, 45, and 33 and a third. The old 78s ran around really fast. We used to have hamsters that we used to go and race on these things. We put the hamster on them and we would race around or get sick and get off. But these things were so fragile that they'd break. And so if you were playing these things, you used to play them at 45. It'd be like you're on a drug trip, or what they say was a drug trip, where everything is so slow. Or you play at a 33 and a third at 78, and everything is like chipmunks. It was really funny. That was entertainment back then. You didn't need drugs to do it, or alcohol. This is entertainment. And it was just with a record player. And then they got this hi-fi stereo system. It had speakers, and it wouldn't be like you would consider a speaker today. They were these little tinny things that sounded horrible. But it had a record player. It had a FM, AM radio station on it. It had old 8-track cassettes on it. This is back before the age of cassettes, the small cassettes. And the 8-tracks were very popular back then. And so they used to play music all the time, and you set a stack of records up there at one time, and then the records would fall, the stylus would come over, play the whole record, return back, and then another record would fall. And you could have songs play over and over again. It was kind of like an old-time version of an MP3 player, which would just play forever. So that's how they did it back then. And my parents used to dance a lot. They used to do the East Coast swing and jitterbug, that kind of stuff. They were spry for being old. So, and they used to do that in the living room, and all the boys were like, oh, good Lord, here we go again. And so they used to do that, and they actually took dance lessons later in life. They would go to the community college and do ballroom dancing. And this is before my mother got very sick and couldn't do it anymore, before she got on the oxygen and had the arthritis problems. But yeah, they used to do a lot of music back then, and it was nothing new. Nothing what I would consider new, which you would consider old. I still remember my parents saying in the 70s, "You call this music? This is crap. I can remember music from 1945, and you could listen to those songs, and you knew all the words. I still remember the words." Well, okay, but that's just a generational thing. But they didn't like the music of the 60s and 70s. They liked the 50s and 60s, the swing, the early rock and roll. Elvis Presley was gone, right? That kind of stuff.
So I assume, if she liked music from the 50s and 60s, I assume when she got to the 2000s, early 2000s, that music seemed foreign to her.
Yeah, she wouldn't listen to it. you know, you get in the car, you listen to some old cassette tape that they had in the car that was Benny Goodman or Louis Armstrong or the Big Bopper or Richie Valens. These kind of artists from that day when they were younger. You know, eventually when you're old enough and you have kids, you'll be thinking about artists of the day here, and that's what you'll like. That's just a generational thing. Uh, Obviously, you know, I like music. I like music of the 70s and 80s and early 90s, and I think music today is a pile of poo, right? That's just the way it is. It's just generational.
Well, if that's what you say is true, then I have some bad choices to listen to. Justin Bieber, that will be banned in my car. But did she sing in public or for church? She didn't sing church Christmas like Silent Night. She hated that. But did she ever sing in
Well, she
public?
was at the choir when she was younger. She had a good singing voice. Uh, Now she never went out. They actually went out and did Christmas carols a couple years in a row. A whole group of friends would go out and they'd all sing Christmas carols. Uh, you know, they thought that was a great time. Then they'd have hot chocolate or spiced uh, cider after that. Uh, but she never sang in a group. She didn't do that kind of stuff. She didn't sing in bars or anything like that. Um, like someone we know. Uh, but she had a good voice, and she would sing. And you know, to me, being a child, she's your mother. And, you know, she sings. She has a great voice,
Yeah.
right? That's just how it was.
So that was pretty much the music part. Now we're gonna move on to miscellaneous questions that could not fit in the category. Did she have a favorite dinner to make, and did she love making that over and over again that you can remember?
She was a great cook. She loved to experiment with cooking. And she used to go and make a lot of Christmas things. She'd make cookies and cakes. She made a fruitcake, believe it or not. Nobody eats fruitcake, but she used to make fruitcake. Um, she'd get all the ingredients, and then she'd have all the boys help because this was a treat back then. You go and you eat the dough of the cookies, right? The sugar cookies. You eat the dough that wasn't going into the cookies. And so you used to like to go in there and do that, and then she'd make eggnog. And Christmas time was a very fun time in our house. Uh, you know, she liked. I don't know if she liked it, but she was very good at Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas dinners. But it's a lot of work, you know, and you get more enjoyment out of the fact that it brings everything together than actually doing the work. And she could cook anything. I mean, she was a very good cook. And I don't think there was anything that I really wouldn't eat. I used to like liver of all things, believe it or not. Um, um, Liver and onions back then. Uh, I liked. I hated asparagus. Hated Brussels sprouts back then. I like them now. But you got to try the new things, and that's what my parents, especially my mom, you know, I don't like this. You didn't say that at the dinner table, right? If you didn't like it, you don't take very much of it, right? And you eat everything you did take because you weren't getting up from the table until you ate it all. You know, there was none of this. I'm not hungry. No, that's tough. You're going to eat it because that's what you put on your plate and it's not going to waste. It was a very frugal time uh, because my dad didn't make much money. Uh, my mom, she was a stay-at-home person, so they had to make ends meet. You didn't waste food. You didn't go out to eat very often. And so everything you did at home.
Did she have a morning routine she liked to follow? Maybe wake you up at a certain time and pack lunch for school if she did pack her lunch.
Uh, Morning routines. It's like any kids now. First day of school, morning routine. She'd be up at the crack of dawn, make your lunch, send you out to the bus stop because that was her time, right? After kids are gone, you know, she can do what she wants. But later in life, you know, after the kids got older, then kids can make their own lunch, and you make it the night before. Um, and you didn't wait until the morning to go rustle around because when my parents were sleeping, they stayed sleeping. you don't want to wake them up because you don't want to wake up the bear. Uh, uh, and so we used to have to grab lunch money, milk money at the time, and my dad would have all his change laid out on his dresser. So you'd open the door real quietly, you'd take the change off. It was in little stacks, and you knew which one was yours. And maybe my mom would see you. I'll see you when you get home, sweetie, or I'm working tonight. Love you. And then you'd go on your way. You know, it's like anything else. As you get older, you're able to take care of yourself. But you know, when you're younger, obviously she'd get you onto the bus and that kind of stuff. But when you're older, you don't want your mom hanging around the bus stop.
Um, so she said she packed school lunch, but you had to take money from your parents' dresser that was yours.
Back then, they used to have lunch boxes that were actually made of steel, metal, and they had Speed Racer on the side, old time cartoon characters, Bugs Bunny, these kind of things that they'd have on the side. They might have a thermos in there, and all the thermoses were glass lined. Well, being kids, you're going to drop the lunchbox, and the glass thermos insert is going to break, and so you were out of the thermos by the first week or two of school. And so they didn't have water bottles like we consider water bottles. They didn't have soda machines at the thing. So if you wanted to drink something, you had to take milk money, and you could either get white milk or chocolate milk. That was it. No other no, there wasn't orange juice, there wasn't water. White milk, chocolate milk, take your pick. Chocolate milk was 5 nickel extra, right? And so my dad would have exactly enough change for one white milk, and that was all you got. So you had to take that if you broke your thermos. You had to pack your lunchbox. You had to put it in the refrigerator. There was a shelf for all your lunch boxes. And my brothers used to go in there and steal what they would like, you know. So if you got a candy bar or something like that, which was a big treat back then, they'd give themselves two and leave you the apple or something like that. You know, talk about who needed to get beat. But yeah, that was the thing back then.
She was fun on trips she took as a family. She was.
Oh yeah, we used to take family vacations down to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. That was the family vacation, and we would pack up the car. We had an old 1971 Ford Fairlane station wagon, and they had little jump seats in the back. No one wore seatbelts back then. You know, you just bounced around the car. Every time your dad hit something, you'd bounce around the car, and it was fun. And then you'd make faces at the people, and you follow you. And then we'd take a trip down to Myrtle Beach, and we'd spend about a week on the beach. Now, they didn't take my youngest brother because he's schizophrenic, so he would be up there with my grandparents. So it was the 3 boys, and then my mom, she wouldn't get in the water very much. She was deathly afraid of sharks, especially after Jaws came out in 1974, the Peter Benchley book, which we used to get on Reader's Digest, believe it or not, these old books, big books like that. And so I read it in like 4th grade. And but my mom, she was terrified of the water and sharks. But she used to get up with my dad early in the morning when all the boys were sleeping. They'd go out onto the beach and comb the beach for seashells and stuff like that. And we'd never even know they were gone because we were sleeping. But they picked up this starfish one day, and they had it in a little plastic bag. It was filled with water, and we were going to go and take this thing back to Pennsylvania with us. I don't know why, but this old station wagon, all the luggage was packed up on the roof of the station wagon and strapped down, and that sun, South Carolina, just beating down on that thing. So we got back up to North Carolina. That was a cooked starfish because it got hot up there. So, but yeah, they were a lot of fun. They take you out there, and my dad had this little blow-up raft, and so my mom would always say, "Don't take them out there to drown them, Jim. We need those kids." So he'd take us out there, and then he'd ride the wave back like a body surfer in this little rubber raft, and we had these little rubber oars on there, and all 4 of us, or all 3 of us, would be in there. My dad would be hanging onto the back, and we used to ride it, and my mom would take pictures on this old 8mm camera that they had back then with no sound. It was just pictures. And they had this old movie projector that my grandfather had, and so they used to put all the tape after it was developed on there, and that you would watch this thing. It was no sound. And everyone was laughing down in the basement of my grandfather's house. Oh, I remember when that happened. What were you saying there? I don't know what you were saying there, because no sound. Uh, and I don't know what ever happened to any of those movie films. I guess my dad still has them somewhere in the basement, but I don't know if you could even get them. They'd be so fragile now. They probably couldn't even transport them to VHS or tape.
So she loved history. She was a big history buff. She said Civil War. So was the Civil War her favorite time period?
The Civil War was her favorite time period by far. I mean, she really enjoyed Bruce Catton, the author, uh, and later in life she was reading a lot of the Shelby books, the Shelby Foote books, uh, and she subscribed to Civil War Times. Uh, and then after that, it was probably World War One. She did a little bit of Revolutionary War, kind of ancient American history. Um, Not too much about Vietnam or Korea. I think they were a little too close to her time period.
Yeah. So was she very religious before the yelling with the priest, or did it decline well after that?
Growing up Catholic in a Catholic school, she was kind of irreligious. Let me put it that way. Would make fun of the ritual that they would have in there, because it was, if you live it, you can make fun of it.
Mm.
And I think that's what it was more than anything else. And I think as she got on later in life, it became less and less important to her. And I think a lot of that was driven by the time in the confessional, where she just didn't think that a man had a right to say what she could do with her body.
But she lived during the Cold War era in the 1950s, so she was roughly 10 years old during this time period. And duck and cover drills were very popular because in face of a Russian nuclear attack, did she have to go through everything did she tell you?
Oh yeah, back then they used to show these duck and cover drills on old films on Saturday night. The little Chilly Billy Theater is what it was, and they do these little old 1950s skits with the duck and cover. And she was saying, "Oh yeah, we used to do that in high school, and you had to get under the desk for debris." In case of a nuclear attack, there was talk about building a bomb shelter around the backyard at one time as well. In case the Russians ever invaded. I'm thinking to myself, yeah, where's Dad going to get the money for the concrete, right? So
Well, was she very distrustful of Russians during the time period she lived in?
everyone was distrustful of the Russians. You get your news from the nightly news. That's all you know. There's no internet. There's nothing like this. So if people are telling you people are bad, you think they're bad.
And the last question here is a personal one, but did you have any favorite memory with your mom? Just you and her?
I have a lot of memories with my mom. After I had joined the Army, uh, and I was in the Army for a while, back in, I guess it was 86 or 87, I joined the paratroopers. And so I was going to jump school, and I came back from jump school, and I was full of myself at the time. And my mom, she was very concerned about me. And I mean, of course, I was 20, 21. Back I was 21, 22, and full of bravado, like most young kids are. And it was like, oh, Mom, nothing's going to happen. And she said, but the paratroopers are the ones they send, and you all die first. No one's going to die. And the sad fact was that at Fort Bragg, just that day before this had gone on, 7 paratroopers were killed in a plane crash down there. So it was one of these things that she's still your mother even though you're older, and she cares about you. Even in my 40s, during the divorce, she cared about you. And that's what parents are supposed to do. And, I have a lot of fond memories. My mom was a very loving woman. Uh, Scrabble was always the fun game of the day because she valued the education, and she was a great Scrabble player. Don't get her on Scrabble or Trivial Pursuit because she'll kick your butt every time. And so we had a lot of time. We got a Christmas gift one time. She did anyhow, from my dad's sister, who had got her a travel Scrabble game with a rotating table and slots. You know how the Scrabble pieces always move. Well, it had the spaces in there that the block would hold in place.
Yes.
And so, you know, my mom loved to cheat at Scrabble. I didn't realize this at the time, but especially when you're young, you know, you'd be sitting there, you'd have six vowels and one consonant, and then she'd have a 7-letter word out there, and then you're looking, what can you spell? I can spell. I don't know what I can spell. Lie. She says, "Let me look at your letters," and so she'd look at them. She says, "Oh yeah, you can do this." And so she'd lay your tile down, and you'd get your points, and you'd feel all proud of yourself because you came up with a lie, right? And then her next word would go right on with the word you had just put down. It's like, what? I was going to go in that space. Not now, sweetie. So she would cheat. And then, especially as we got older and all the boys had moved out, uh, we would go back at Christmas time or Thanksgiving, and we'd have Trivial Pursuit games. And my mom was a know-it-all. She used to know obscure facts. She knew Alexander the Great's horse's name, which actually was on Final Jeopardy at one point, and she knew the answer. And so she knew all these things, and so you'd be going around, and she'd get all the slices of pie up there, and she'd make fun of my dad one time, which was hilarious, because the question was, how fast? What is the term for the distance that light travels in 1 year, which is a light year, obviously. And my dad was just scratching his head because he couldn't be that simple, right? So he just gets all fed up. He says, "I don't know, a zog." And so my mom just, "A zog? Really? A zog? A zog? Really? That's your final answer? Really?" And so everyone got a kick out to this day, as it was funny how it was. So that was a good time around the table. Uh, she liked movies, she liked the games, that kind of stuff. Things that exercised your mind. She loved crossword puzzles.
Well, that's all the questions I have. Thank you for your time, and thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.